Farm Talk on CFRU 93.3 FM. Welcome to another edition of Food Farm Talk, where we celebrate food and honor those who champion the cause of food in society.
Hello, and welcome to another exciting edition of Food Farm Talk on CFRU 93.3 FM. I'm your host, Emily Duncan, and the show is also hosted by Abdul Rahim Abdullahi. If you're just tuning in this week, we're hosting the second part of a seminar that we aired last week. The seminar was put together by the Arrell Food Institute and the Food from Thought Initiative at the University of Guelph, and it's a panel of experts talking about lessons for Canada's food system from the COVID-19 pandemic. So without further ado, I'll allow Rennie Van Acker, the Dean of the Agricultural College, to introduce the panelists, and then we'll pick up right where we left off last week with the discussion about COVID-19 and the food system. Thank you so much for listening to Food Farm Talk on CFRU 93.3 FM.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rennie Van Acker. I'm Dean of the Ontario Agricultural College at the University of Guelph. Welcome to this first seminar. This is a combined seminar of the Arrell Food Institute at the University of Guelph and the Food from Thought Initiative, also at the University of Guelph. The intent of the seminar is to bring expert perspective and insight into questions about potential impacts of, in the near and longer term, of COVID-19 on Canada's food system and the myriad of questions and implications that may arise because of that. The theme of today's seminar is, in fact, what can Canada's food system take away from the COVID-19 pandemic? We have a great panel today. Our panelists include Larry Goodridge. He is the Leung Professorship in Food Safety and the Director of the Center for Research in Food Safety. Jess Haynes, who's an Associate Professor in the Department of Family Relations and Applied Nutrition and one of the leads of the Guelph Family Health Study. We have Dana McCauley, who is Director of New Venture Creation in the Research Innovation Office of the University of Guelph, and Mike von Massow. Mike is the OAC Chair in Food Systems Leadership and an Associate Professor in the Department of Food, Agricultural, and Resource Economics at the University of Guelph.
When we emerge from this pandemic and the introspection occurs, I think one of the lasting legacies will be a critical dive into the fact that we largely still remain a reactive society. So we've seen many examples of that during this pandemic. And I think this will allow the nation as a whole to really begin to have that critical discussion around moving from reactive to proactive. I note that this is the third coronavirus outbreak in the last 16 years. And I think that we unfortunately will continue to see this. And I think a lot of public health experts agree. So we really have to ask ourselves, and to Mike's last point, how do we solve these bumps in the road? Assuming that we will see another outbreak, hopefully not as major as this in the future, how do we deal with that? And I think one solution is to really develop proactive approaches. So for example, just yesterday, the federal government announced that it was giving $20 million to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency to improve food safety practices. And this is largely surrounding just general food safety practices, not necessarily to do with COVID-19. However, there were some aspects that were related to that. For example, the idea is that the CFIA would transition to flexible means for conducting inspections. including using electronic devices during this pandemic, and that's something that could be used in the future. Also, Mike made a comment about packaged food, and I note that with this funding, the CFIA will work to make packaged foods more available at grocery stores and other retail outlets, so that the idea is to hopefully reduce food waste, which is certainly one of the consequences of this pandemic. And then finally, in Alberta, in collaboration with the federal government, recently announced that federal and provincial inspectors would cooperate and work together during this pandemic. So these are things that, while useful now, certainly could be adopted as a roadmap going forward in a proactive manner, so that if or when we see additional diseases and pandemics develop, we are in a much better place to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. When this seminar was being set up, we reached out to the community that our partners interact with the Arrell Food Institute and the broad Food from Thought project, and they provided some questions that they had that they were hoping the panelists could dig into, and so I'm going to ask some of those questions. The first one relates to what a friend of mine calls the universal thought of the day, which is, what am I going to eat? And in that respect, I would be interested in the panel's perspectives on how COVID perhaps is changing our perspectives on food and maybe our priority around food, and what impacts that may have on what consumers do, what families do, and maybe what the food industry does. And so maybe in particular, I would look to maybe Jess to start with a perspective on that question.
Yeah, I think as Dana said in her initial answer was, I think we're going to see some changes that might be just due to the fact that, you know, sort of temporary because our situation has changed so much. But I think what's really interesting too to think about is what are the ones that might sustain afterwards. And so at the Guelph Family Health Study, we look at families and look at how families interact around food and engage around food. So one of the questions we're really interested in is we have certainly heard from families, and you'll if you look on social media, et cetera, that people have time to cook. My joke is we have time to do everything, right? We have a lot of time on our hands, and lots of people are spending it cooking. And so that is a shift. We previously had lots of families who just described themselves too busy. I don't have time to come home and prep a big meal, so I use prepared meals to feed my children. But now they do have time, so it'll be interesting to see. We're looking at what happened before, but we're doing a measurement now to see how are families engaging their children in meal prep, how much prep time are families taking. And I think the really interesting question is, what do we see afterwards? You know, is it that, is it possible there's a bit of a shift to acknowledge like, oh, I actually, you know, the better I get at this, the faster it is. I can do this efficiently, or hopefully sparking a bit of passion, you know, as opposed to something they have to do. Maybe they start to really enjoy it, and maybe their children are motivators to do it because they're interested. So I think that's one change that we're really interested to see, because we know that when you prep meals at home, they typically are healthier than the foods you buy as prepared or out at restaurants. So it has some health implications. So we'll be interested to see if that's sustained.
Thank you, Jess. Are others interested in chiming in on that question? Dana?
Yeah, I'm really heartened as somebody who loves to cook herself that so many people are getting into the kitchen with their children. And I'm hopeful that this means that kids are going to be enabled to be more involved. And even if families go back to being super scheduled, which they will, and I bet they'll enjoy that for a month or so, I think this is ingraining meal planning. We can only go to the grocery store once a week. So we really have to think about eating. And the last 10 years or so, we've been able to have that universal question of the day be answered on a whim. I want sushi, I want this, I want that. Whereas now that's not exact. We can still get takeout, but still we're having to plan more. And hopefully those types of behaviors will mean that we are seeing people do more meal planning and a little more cooking, even if it shifts to the weekend and it becomes sort of like knitting or you know what you know, another type of household project that used to be a daily chore but is now a you know, a sometimes thing. Hopefully we'll see people developing those skills and practicing the skills, because I think once you realize that making a stir fry is faster than waiting for Chinese food to arrive, you'll look at it a little differently. And that'll mean there'll be, again, a shift in what entrepreneurs and food companies can contribute to consumers. Of course, I think the online shopping, this is, been the motivator to click people over into using online platforms to order their groceries. I think that a lot of people are looking forward to getting back to wandering around stores and chatting with the butcher and that kind of thing. But again, I think that long term, there's now no question that online grocery shopping is going to be just, part of the fabric of day-to-day urban life anyhow, if not possible out in the outskirts.
Thank you, Dana. And I suspect Mike will want to follow exactly on that, perhaps.
Well, I think the first thing I'd say is I agree with Dana. I think we had seen relatively slow growth of the online either delivery or click and collect model. We've seen a rapid escalation. I think some of that slow growth was people wanting the experience as Dana described, and maybe having some uncertainty about the quality of produce they were going to get if someone else was selecting it for them, or not wanting to wait and those sorts of things. And I expect for some people the experience has been better than they expected, and that they won't go back. And that I expect for others, they'll say, well, now that the risk is reduced, I will go back to back to the grocery store. But I think without a doubt, we'll have seen a growth in that approach that would not have happened in the absence. One thing that will be interesting to see is one of the industries hit hardest by this change in physical distancing has been restaurants. They are a relatively low margin business, and so we're seeing significant pain. Food service employs over 1 million Canadians, and probably 85% of those Canadians are now unemployed. And even when I think we're already seeing stories that some of these restaurants will not survive this closure, even with some of the government support we're seeing out there. And to me, that's sad. And I think that also that restaurant industry is going to be one of the slowest to recover, because even as we get away from physical distancing, some people, particularly those who perceive themselves as vulnerable, will say, I'm going to wait till a vaccine is available and proven and tested before I'm willing to do things like go to restaurants again. And I think that will be something that goes beyond the next however long we are in working from home and home isolation. I think that the restaurant industry will recover more slowly, and I think that's unfortunate. I also wonder if the way we shop might also change a little bit, in that those of us who are still going to the grocery store are going less frequently, because we're saying, well, we still want to shop, or there's a long wait for the delivery or whatever. And we're shopping once every 7 or 8 days rather than every couple of days, as more and more people, particularly empty nesters like us, we're doing. And that will also change how we eat at home to a degree. The last point, if I may, is that I think we're probably seeing a change in what we're eating at home. Not only are we cooking more, but many Canadians are feeling an income pinch. And so we're probably buying simpler items. We're probably buying cheaper cuts of meat. And so the relative prices of some of those things may change just as we see some of those relative demand changes going forward.
Thank you. And finally, Larry, I know you wanted to comment on this question as well.
Yes, we know that many cases of foodborne illness occur as a result of improper food handling and preparation by consumers in their own kitchens. And so if it is in fact true that as a result of this pandemic, more and more people will prepare food in their own homes, then I think we might expect an uptick in foodborne illnesses. And so I think one thing that would need to be done is that the government, federal government, provincial governments should really begin to think about more educational material regarding food safety for consumers.
Thanks, Larry. Another question that came up, and it was really a follow-on to this last question, and I know many of you talked about shopping patterns. There was a question about whether COVID and the way it's shifting in the very near term, immediately shopping patterns, will also have an impact on what consumers are looking for in terms of domestic versus imported or local. What will it do in terms of that that trend also? So I don't know who would like to weigh in first on that. Jess, I might ask you to go first on this one again in terms of how families are perceiving that or might perceive that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. And I think it links to what Larry had said. It will depend, I think, how much people see food potentially as a risk. So where they're accessing their food, if they believe there's risk related to illnesses. I think the other thing will also be the price sensitivity, that some of those options for local, sort of potentially local artisan type things that can be more expensive, it's just going to be difficult for families who are struggling economically to afford them. So I think it will be interesting to see people's response, because I think there's a few factors that could be influencing some of those choice around local foods versus some of those imported options.
And
Mike, I think you wanted to comment.
I think that when we see times like this, we have this impulse to be maybe not insular, but to be supportive of our local communities. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I think a lot of those things make a ton of sense. If we can find ways to support local producers or local retailers or local entrepreneurs, as Dana said, I think those are great things. One of the beauties of our food system is that we have all of this choice, and I think that there will be an inclination to find some of those local sources. I think, though, something that we should think a little bit about is I've heard some arguments that we should sort of become more insular as a nation and really shorten supply chains and focus on local production. And I think in many ways there are some benefits to that, but I'll go back to what I said at the beginning, is we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater and think about some of these relative risks. If we stopped buying imported goods altogether, well, we wouldn't have Brussels sprouts and broccoli in the winter, notwithstanding some greenhouse capacity in this country. But there are also other risks. We talked about the beef plant in outside of Calgary, representing 40% of the packing capacity in this country. Given our integrated system, we don't have it representing 40% of our beef production within the system, and that buffers the risk. Crop production is a biological process. And if we have, as an example, an exclusive focus on a specific region, and we have a drought or hail or other weather calamity, we don't have the ability to sort of supplement. So I think buying local, supporting your local, if it makes sense and if it's something you want, makes perfect sense. But cutting ties to a global marketplace brings its own risks along with it.
Dana, I wonder if I could ask you to comment on how the startup and entrepreneurial community in the food sector might view that sort of question.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, because you're right. Big companies do think differently and market themselves differently, and have different decision-making trees at play. Entrepreneurs generally in the past, and I think will continue into the future, are advised to try and be a hometown hero first. And a lot of the education I do with growing companies is how to take that unique selling point of being the local supplier and the champion of your area, and become able to branch out into other parts of their geographical reach. So they probably will continue to do that, because it's simple and it gives them an opportunity to know a lot of people in their community and to leverage the brands and reputations of their partners in their supply chain. But I do think that maybe a little bit outside of like food itself, but into other types of household goods and other parts of our basket, I do think being Canadian made will continue to be a really big motivator. I see a lot of people in social media right now talking about how vulnerable we are at not being able to make particular items at this point in time, because they have to come from, ingredients come from other countries, parts come from other countries, and I think that nationalism will probably cast a shadow and an effect into the future. But for the companies who are really just trying to rebound and get back out there, I think that if they're entrepreneurial and they're owned and operated in a particular province or town, that regardless of where they get their stuff from, I think that, to Mike's point, there's a lot of heart for helping our neighbors right now. In my local community, we have a really vibrant farmers market that starts usually in May and goes to October every Thursday between like 5 and 8 p.m. And there's all kinds of people saying, how are we going to make the farmers market work? Can we move it online? Can we do this? Can we do that? So there's this bridge between community activism and entrepreneurs and suppliers that is keeping people, I think, feeling connected even when they can't literally see one another. So there's an interesting social dynamic there that I'm probably not qualified to dig into and understand, but that I can note.
Thanks very much, Dana. I'm gonna ask one more question, and then we will have to wrap up. The last question is really around a much broader perspective, and it's a question about how this crisis might be impacting both provincial and federal strategies in relation to Canada's food system. So I wonder what perspectives our panelists might have in that regard. What changes might be coming, both provincially and federally, what shifts there might be, what refocus there might be around our food system given the pandemic. Who would like to have a first go at that very broad question? Mike, maybe can I ask you to go first?
Sure, I'll jump in, and I'm going to steal one of Larry's ideas, given that I'm getting to go first, is we've seen to a significant degree reaction to historically to issues, and I think we'll probably see a real focus both at the provincial and the federal, and frankly at the municipal level, to planning. I mean, we can't plan for everything, and we can't anticipate everything. And there may be some risks that we say the low probability, high impact, there's not a lot we can do for those. So I think we'll see a much more proactive planning relating to the food system. I think Jess made a good point in her opening to say that food security in this country and in many developed countries is about income and not about availability. And I think we've heard the federal government talk about a food policy for Canada. I think we're seeing the provincial governments talk about those sorts of things as well. And having a conversation around food security that focuses on income rather than access, I think will be something that for sure we will be looking at in more detail. Last point I'll make is around food processing strategy, where I talked early about processing being a pinch point, and even if it's not in anticipation of another outbreak, finding ways to add more value to our agricultural products here in Canada rather than shipping raw ingredients out and importing processed products back, not only gives us some risk reduction in terms of emergency preparedness, but frankly creates economic activity in this country that we can use. And I expect that initiatives around enhancing our food processing capacity will be a wonderful outcome of the pinch that we had here in this circumstance.
Would one other panelist, we are getting short on time, but I wonder if one other panelist would also like to chime in on that very broad question. Dana?
Yeah, I'll just say that, I've been, and I can't remember who said it, I think it was Jess, that, it's been remarkable how quickly the government has jumped in to try to shore up our foundation of social safety. But when they decide to open the economy, I think that businesses will see a lot of incentives for helping them to ramp up very, very quickly, whether that's support for doing R&D to be more competitive, et cetera. So I'm quite hopeful that what this government has shown us at every level, at least provincially here in Ontario and federally, that they're going to follow that up. They seem to be remarkably thoughtful, and I think that they are already planning to have incentives in place to help reinvigorate manufacturing and restaurants and many other sectors. So I've got my my fingers crossed that that's going to help a lot of businesses to recoup what they're losing right now.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'd like to thank our panel again, Dana McCauley, Larry Goodrich, Jess Haynes, and Mike Van Masso here at the University of Guelph. Excellent insights. It's a pleasure to be able to tap into your expertise and to get your perspectives on what is, arguably such an important sector for all of us, and not an optional sector, our food. I would like to thank the Arrell Food Institute for organizing this seminar, one of a series that will be developed to allow for these kinds of deeper perspectives, expert perspectives on important questions, especially in relation to food. And I'd like to thank all of you for watching. Please stay safe and stay healthy. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Food Farm Talk. See you next week for another exciting edition.